this is Mike with Motorrad Audio, and this video covers installation of our Stage 1.5 audio upgrade kit for the 2022 and newer BMW K1600s with the TFT screen. Let's get into it. Okay, so we'll start with a quick unboxing of what's in the package. So first things first are your 5 1/4 inch pods. These are preloaded, pre-terminated for the quick disconnects that we have and ready for drop-in. You'll have the 4-channel amplifier itself that will be pre-mounted on its bracket. It will be pre-tuned for your particular bike and ready to mount, plug in, and go. On the amplifier, you have your input plug, which is the white plug. That is going to match the plug on the front T-harness, so color for color there. And your black plug here in the T-harness will be for the front speaker outputs of the amp, which is the other black plug that has the white and gray wires. Those are technically the front, and then the rear is your purple green that's going to your rear harness for potential rear speakers down the road. In this package here for the fuse holder, you'll have the actual fuse holder itself that's pre-terminated and ready for hookup. You'll have some other miscellaneous parts that are in this package. The Allen wrench for the fuse holder. You'll have a couple packs of dielectric grease that are for these connections here at the amplifier to kind of help strengthen those up from a longevity standpoint. You'll have a speed clip and bolt for mounting the amplifier, and you'll have a ring connector for the ground wire when you run that to the battery. You'll have your T-harness for the front that plugs into the factory plugs and plugs into the amplifier. You'll have your main power and ground harness that runs from front to back. You'll have your rear speaker output harness for your future upgrades that again runs off of the purple and green black plug here for the rear. You'll have some miscellaneous wire ties to help keep things neat behind the scenes, and you'll have a sheet that has some suggestions when it comes to tuning the amplifier, or sorry, tuning the radio to the right settings to kind of match how we have the amplifier tuned for you to get maximum output and clarity. Okay, the tools needed for installation are going to be a T25 Torx screwdriver, a Phillips head screwdriver for dealing with the battery terminals, a 1/2 inch wrench, preferably a ratcheting style for mounting the amplifier, a set of wire strippers and wire crimpers for taking care of the ground connections at the battery, and a torch, cigarette lighter, heat gun, anything along those lines for the heat shrink of the terminal at the battery as well. And that's it. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started by removing the front grills and the LCD screen to get at our front pods. So first thing you wanna do is turn the key on. Go ahead and motorize your windshield up so you have access to these screws that are in the top. Once you have that up, go ahead and pop your top cover here. That way you go ahead and turn power back off to the bike, the windshield will stay up and you can access the top screws. One thing we definitely suggest for throughout the entire installation is find a place that you can put all of these parts that you take off of the bike that go with their associated screws, because there are going to be some screws that are varying lengths in various locations, and if your installation stretches out over a period of time, you may have a hard time remembering which screws went back in which location and which length. So it definitely helps to have somewhere that you can keep all that stuff isolated together. So the first thing we'll do is remove the top 4 screws here. There's going to be one right here, one here, and then the 2 that hold the top of the screen in. Once you have those 2 screws that are out of the middle there that hold the screen, you can go ahead and pop the screen top out and lift it right out. There will be 2 plugs here. One that is just a small plug that's pressure fit in there, it just pulls right out with no releases. The other is going to have release tabs that you squeeze to be able to work that plug out. Just be careful that you hold this good so it doesn't pop off when that plug lets go. So now your screen is out. You want to go ahead and set that to the side with those 2 screws. And then go ahead and remove the ones that are in the top portion of the grill here. Once you have those two out, go ahead and remove the two silver badges here. Go ahead and keep that screw in here with it. And now we'll move on to what we refer to as these little winglets on the side. So I'll take the camera off and give you a better view here. Okay, so our little wing here has a screw. It's right down buried in here. So that is still going to be the standard Torx that you need to remove there. So we'll go ahead and get that removed and I'll show you what's behind it. Same thing on the other side as well. Okay, so you loosen that up a significant amount and that actually releases this piece here. It does come up this way and I'll show you the rest of that mechanism here. So you'll see that screw that we just loosened way up right here. This just kind of goes in and puts pressure on a tab. So you don't really need to remove this screw completely, you just remove it a significant amount. And then you'll go ahead and remove these three screws that are holding this the rest of this cover on there. Again, same thing on the other side as well. So now that we have both wings off, our next couple locations are going to be this piece right down in here, which goes through this little plastic kind of corner cap, so to speak. Again, those are on both sides. And then also our two screws here, one on each side. So we'll get those out and then move on to the next step. This out, nice long screw that goes with it. And now that those little corner pieces are out, you'll see the final two screws that you have to remove, one here and one on the other side for taking these off. Screw can be a little difficult to get out because you really can't get your fingers down in there, so you may end up just kind of jarring it loose when you remove this grill. So the grill is snapped in with a couple snaps. You'll just want to pull it this way towards you. It usually breaks free a little bit dramatically, so just kind of keep yourself under control that you don't go flying backwards as you're pulling on it. There goes our screw that I couldn't get out. And now we have the grill out. And we'll go ahead and pull the other side while we're at it. Okay, so now that our covers are off, it'll be pretty obvious. There's three screws that hold the actual pods in on each side. You'll see the plug for the pod right here with a squeeze tab at the top of it that you squeeze to unplug that. So I'll have to put the camera down, go ahead and take these screws out and take these two pods out. This one here is another one where it's hard to get your fingers in there, so it may be easier to get that out with the pod all in one piece. Okay, so now that our pods are out, to make running the speaker wires to the pods easier, we're going to go ahead and move on to the amplifier section of it, to where we're pulling this side panel. So first things first, we'll want to remove the screws that hold this piece and these two here on. So most of them are pretty obvious. All of the screws in this panel. There are two that are longer than the other ones, so you do want to keep track of that. This is a very, very short screw that goes up here, so again, note that location. And you can also go ahead and pull this one down here that's at the tip of this other shroud that you uncovered when unscrewing the other. This does not have a screw in the other end. It just has this little rubber boot that kind of holds it up in there. So this comes right out. Your next screws related to this are going to be up under this front end. So I'll do something to kind of give you a shot of that. And then there is one more screw right here that you would need to remove while we're in this location. Okay, so under here, there's a screw right here above the light, and then another one right below the light that hold the rest of this side panel on. Now that we have those two lower screws out, you'll have one more that's right here underneath this. This does open up, as you may have noticed earlier. It hangs right here, but it does have an additional little extra section that it will go. Right here is a little plastic, I guess you could say a little plastic rivet, but there is a very small dot in the center of that. You're going to actually need to push that with a pick tool or something to that effect to release this. So we'll get into that here real quick and kind of go over the details of that. So with our little plastic rivet here, usually just take something like a pick tool, push right down on that center. Doesn't usually go all the way through to where you can get it out. So you do need to actually push that pin all the way out. Typically a paper clip works great for that. You'll hear it fall when you do that. With any luck, it'll hit the floor. Most often it hits the floor. If not, it should come off when you remove these panels, but you're definitely gonna have to keep your eyes open for it because it is a very, very small little cylinder of plastic. Once that has released and let go, this little top piece will pop right out with ease. Set that to the side and get your other screw out here. That is a fairly long screw, which is very different than all of the rest of the ones. And that is basically it. This panel will then pop off. The screw that I dropped earlier falls out, and you are ready to go for the amplifier portion. And just for a visual, the piece that pushed through and fell to the floor is basically that. So there's not a whole lot to that piece that you need for that center pin. So now that you have the side off and the speakers out, the next thing is going to be running the input-output harness that comes in the kit. So what that is this harness that's in the box. These two plugs are going down to the amplifier. They are the input and output of the amplifier for the front channels. You have these two here. These white plugs are the BMW plug that is included on the pod that you just removed. So these do plug right back into the factory plug that is in there right now. And this new plug is what's going to our new pod. So the shorter version, of course, is going to be right here closest to the amplifier. The longer end is going to reach across to the top. And I'll show you where these wires are supposed to go. So your amplifier, go ahead and move this back in here. Your amplifier is going to be nestled right here between the brake system and the front with the bracket that holds it. So we'll get to that in just a second, but you're going to need your wires to shoot up in this area. So the easiest thing to do is grab your harness with these ends, and they will fish right down through here to that other side. So it's going to be fairly easy to feel your way through here once you, once I can put the camera down and kind of show you fishing that through. And then you'll have your shorter length of wires that will come in here. This will plug into the OEM. This will be there for the new pod. And then the longer one will run across and tuck behind here to the other side. So you'll just want to bring that through the channel here and kind of keep it out of the way of your pods as you do so. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. Okay, so you want to bring these two plugs down into this area. So you'll bring them in from the top. There's a couple different locations that you can run these through, so you don't have to be too terribly picky about where they're going there. It'll fish right down to here, so they're right there to plug into the amplifier. And these will be right here to plug into that speaker. All right, so we'll go ahead and plug that white OEM plug back into the OEM plug that we unplugged from earlier. And we'll take this end, route it up behind where the LCD screen would normally be. So bring it across here to the other side. Plug in our other side to the OEM plug as well. One other thing of note, when I ran the cable across earlier, I ran it in front of this cable, which kind of binds things up in here. So if you happen to have done that before you put your pod in, go ahead and bring the cable that's coming across behind this fabric wrapped one that goes to the screen. Just keeps everything freed up a little better back there. Okay, so for the amplifier portion, you're going to want to remove this panel and basically loosen this panel up for the routing of wires through here. So you'll be taking out this screw here and this screw here, and then up here you'll notice this screw in the front edge of that, and then another one right up here that's right by the handlebars. So we'll go ahead and get to removing those and move on to the next step. So now that you have those screws out, you'll need to remove this top cover. It does have one of the antennas to the system that is connected to it that you'll need to unplug, and you'll also need to cut a wire tie that is holding that plug in place. So take a set of wire cutters, snip your little wire tie that's down here holding that pink looking plug, squeeze the tab and unplug that, and this will come out. This is actually the FM antenna. I'm sure plenty of people know that these bikes don't have the greatest FM reception. That's all you got for an antenna, so that does definitely help contribute to that poor reception. Okay, so now that we have those screws out and this top piece popped off, you'll notice there is one more screw that is holding this top portion of this that's exposed. So you'll want to take that screw out as well. We're not fully removing this side panel and all of this stuff. We're just getting this a little bit loose to where we can get behind there, routing our wires up and through. Okay, so now we're going to mount our amplifier. The amp is going to fit right up in here. You'll see a black heavy metal tab here. Used to be used for mounting the horn from the factory a long time ago, and it just still exists there. So we're going to use that for our amplifier mount, and then the other end of the amp rests firmly on this piece here, and we'll wire tie that in place. And we'll go ahead and plug in this input section and kind of get going with that. Okay, so for this portion, you're going to be using this nut and speed, or bolt and speed clip that came in the kit with the fuse holder and all. The speed clip is going to go up on that bracket. Just push that right on top of it. The bolt is a coarse thread. It does grab a lot, so if you have a little bit of WD-40 or something along those lines, that might help you in getting that to go through. It is a quite frustrating location to get your hands into and to be able to see. So you'll probably want a headlight or something along those lines to be able to kind of see what you're doing as well. You'll need a 1/2-inch wrench, preferably a ratcheting style, because you get very minor turns of the wrench when you're putting this in. It's definitely the most frustrating part of the installation for sure. So we'll go ahead and get to mounting this piece in here. So the amp will rest right here and go right up on top of your bracket. Very close quarters, so I apologize for any of y'all with large hands. This is going to be a challenge. I don't have large hands, and it's still quite challenging to get in here and get this mounted. So it is seated in there. I'm going to start ratcheting this and probably put you on fast forward because this is going to be a while. Okay, so now that our amp is mounted, you'll want to put a wire tie right here to this other foot to hold this end of it from being able to kind of wiggle around. This is the input plug to the amplifier. It has a matching white plug here that came from our harness that ran up to the top. So you'll basically just take some of that dielectric grease that we supplied, just as a little extra precaution. Squirt a little bit of that into each of these plugs, or each of those holes. Plug that harness in and it's ready to go. This is the front output of the amplifier. The white and gray wires in the bundle, those are going to plug to the same black plug here, and that feeds back to the new speakers. So same thing, put a little dielectric grease in here. And plug these together, tuck them right up in this hole, wire tie it to this bracket. There's an extra hole right there in the top of the bracket for a wire tie to hold these two there. You may want to wait until you've done your speakers up top to make sure you have enough slack in the wires that you have the option to kind of pull those around as you install the top pods. And then once you're done with those, go ahead and wire tie this into place so you have plenty of wiggle room that you can move around in there. Next, we'll move on to the rear wire harness that runs to the back and the power and ground harness that run to the battery. You'll notice this blue wire in here. This is normally a turn-on wire for normal situation installs. On this bike, this amp is using an automatic turn-on circuit, so when the factory radio comes on, this turns on in response to the voltage that comes in on the speaker leads on the input. So it does not need a wire to turn it on and off. That also means as soon as your radio is off, this turns off and there's no draw on the battery when the bike is sitting around. So it does have an automated circuit for turning itself on and off. So we'll move on to that step. So the general idea of running the power, ground, and the rear harness is that they are going to feed up through here and then fish underneath there up to the top and underneath this panel down along and tucked underneath this gap here on top of the gas tank. And then they'll come down, come out at the bottom down here and run right to your battery for the power and ground. And then your rear speaker harness will continue on and go through here up to the very back of the bike. The one big thing here is that the rear speaker harness has two ends. It has one end with your right and left that are back here to be able to a quick disconnect for servicing the bike. And the other end is what feeds into the amplifier. So you're actually going to be running this rear speaker harness this direction with the small plug, because trying to fish these two larger plugs through a lot of these channels is challenging, to say the least. Frankly, it's a little challenging just with the 4-pin. So you will be running one wire from back to front and the other from front to back. So it will be a little bit odd that you can't just run them together. So we'll go ahead and get started on that. Okay, so we're going to be running our rear harness from back to front. You'll basically fish it right through this little hump where all the other wires are going. Pretty straightforward to bring that along with the other wire bundles that are there. Once you've pulled the length of the wire through, you want to make sure that you leave enough length for your right and left plugs to be able to reach to the plugs that will be coming to them later. So don't pull too much of it through. Leave yourself a little wiggle room back here, and go ahead and throw a wire tie to hold this in place where you want it to be. Now that you have that there, you're going to be running this cable right along with the other bundle, wire tying it along the way. We're going to need to pull these 4 large Torx bolts that are shooting through this apparatus here. That's going to loosen this particular piece here up to where we can lift it up a little bit for routing the plugs underneath it, and then tighten it back down when everything is done. Okay, to pull those Torxes out, ironically, you need to move this out of the way, which is a free Torx screwdriver if you don't happen to have one for the previous portions of this installation. So with those 4 out, we have a lot more wiggle here to be able to lift this bracket up and down for fishing wires and kind of make that a little bit easier. Okay, so now that this panel is loose and can lift up and have room to run underneath here, this panel is going to lift back, and you'll basically be bringing your wires up through here and then bringing them around and up to the top edge here. So along this edge, there's a decent little gap underneath it that goes up underneath this cover here. But when you snap this piece back down on, it'll basically hold those wires in that channel and keep them from sliding back down into, you know, just in the way in general. It's definitely easier to not pull this entire panel because of the gas cap and everything else. If you want to go that far, you certainly can, but tucking them up in here does really well as far as holding those wires in place. So we'll go ahead and get to running that rear speaker wire harness up through there, and then we'll get to the power wire going the other direction. Once you get to this point here, you're going to be feeding the wire down this way to this other end that's hollow that you can get your hand into. So let's see if I can reposition a little bit for you. So basically right up through here, there's an empty spot that you could easily feed this down to. Feeding this down versus feeding the other one up is definitely a little easier. We'll use a longer wire tie to help guide the next harness when we're going the opposite direction, because it helps to feed this wire down through here a lot easier, or up through here a lot easier. So now we have this down through. It's ready to go right here and plug into your rear output. Don't forget to put a little dielectric grease on there again for that long-term corrosion. And that portion is ready to go. Okay, for running the power harness, we like to tape our power wires to one of the long wire ties, where you're taping one of the wires to begin with and then taper down to the end of the wire tie and tape it as it continues. We keep the wires separate because it makes it easier for pulling these things through without as much resistance. So we'll get to doing that. Again, right through this same opening here, you'll just fish your wire tie up through that hole, grab it on the other end, and pull your wires through. Once you get there, come back down, add your dielectric grease in here. And plug your plugs together. So you'll want to go ahead and tuck everything up in and go ahead and wire tie those into place down here where they're out of the way. That way, as you're running your power and ground the rest of the way and tucking everything, you don't cause any extra pulls down here that restrict where you want to actually tie these up. So we'll get those tied up and then we'll continue on with the path through here. Forgot forgot, there is a wire harness right up here at the top with a plug that you can wire tie these to so they're not constantly trying to fall down on you. Once you're down here near the battery, you'll want to loop these wires underneath this really heavy wire harness that's there. That way they're not running over top of that and kind of a little more exposed, so to speak, visually, and make it in the way of bind up on the seat a little bit. So once you're all routed through there, you can put your bolts back into the bottom section here to hold this, and we'll deal with your power and ground. So now you have your power wire here. This is going to be leading to the fuse holder that we have supplied. So this will go up into the fuse holder as shown in our separate video, and then connecting and then drop down into this pocket as a safe place to store it. But first things first, we'll start with our ground wire. You're going to want to cut that to length to whatever you feel is proper. Give you a little bit of wiggle room in here for future servicing, that sort of thing. Strip back and expose the end of it. Give it a twist. Take the ring connector that was supplied. Slide the boot down over the wire and crimp your connector on. Give it a tug, make sure it's got a good crimp. Slide the sheet back over it, and you're ready to make that connection. So all you need there is a Phillips head screwdriver. And our ground is done. So for the power, you're going to be pulling this back, popping the cover off here. You have an Allen wrench that was supplied with it to loosen up the screw for the empty hole here. And loosen that up for your wire to go in. Strip about a ½ inch worth of wire because there is a lot of space up in there. So I just want to maximize the wire contact with the fuse holder. Probably use a better set of strippers than what I have here because these are not doing so great. Once you have that, once again, give it a twist. Poke it through the rubber seal here at the bottom. And bring it up into the fuse holder itself. Crank that Allen head down on it pretty good. And slide this boot back up in it to seal that up watertight. Snap the cap back on, and you are ready to go. You drop this down in here, connect it to the battery, and away you go. So I'll leave that disconnected for now, but that'll be the final step once everything is hooked up and you have your speakers installed. Okay, so now that everything's done with the amp, we're going to move on to dropping the front speakers in. Just plug your pod in and remount it right to the factory locations. As you're tightening down, give a slight little upward push from the bottom to kind of make sure it's seated as high as possible, because the grill is very close at the bottom section here. So just want to make sure that you get all the clearance needed. Same thing here. Plug in your plug. As you start snugging your screws up, give it a little push up. And you're in there. Wire tie your speaker wires that went across to get those nice and tucked up in there and protected, and you'll be able to reassemble the front end.